What's up, horror fans? It is spring break for some of us that live in New York. And if you like spring break, the first thing that comes to mind is H.P. Lovecraft. It is Lovecraft month. Get your tentacles out, put a little suntan lotion on it, get nice and close to some COVID, and get infected with some madness. I am Anchor Pete, also known as AnchorPete29 on Twitter, and I am here with my co-host, Dr. ZaiusGoD, the man Danny. Danny, you look like you're having a good time over there.
I am having a time.
The book that we're going to talk about tonight, The Hungry Moon, probably the scariest book I've read in a while. What about you?
Since we've been in quarantine, I've read through Audible. I've read more books than I have in probably the last decade, which is kind of sad. And I mean, I've been doing a lot of Stephen King. We've covered a lot of Stephen King on our channel, and so Hungry Moon is definitely up there. There was some really freaky stuff. And a lot of the scary stuff in this book is not, I think, what a lot of other people would consider to be the scary stuff. For me, it was that there is a lot of Lovecraft to this, but there's also a lot of like religious fanaticism, which that's the type of stuff that really creeps me out. So this book definitely worked for me on multiple levels.
Yeah. Oh boy, we are like on the same page for that one. The religious fanaticism stuff is the scariest shit in this book. Absolutely. But let's give some people background, because either A, they love this book and they just found us just now, or B, they watch our channel and they're probably like, what the hell is this book? This book is written by Ramsey Campbell. It came out in 1986. Ramsey Campbell is often considered a contemporary of Stephen King. And he's inspired by Lovecraft with his writings. A month or so ago, I was like, I want to do Lovecraft month, and I want to read a book that's like a Lovecraft story, but I want to see it in like the modern setting. And so people suggested Ramsey Campbell. Then we did a little search, and it said that this was one of his best books. So did you, besides it being scary, Danny, did you actually enjoy reading this book?
I really enjoyed it. I really did. It's not a perfect book. I think we were saying before, over on your channel, on the Anchor Pete channel, we reviewed Needful Things by Stephen King. And one of the issues we had with that book, while we all liked it, was there were a few too many characters. And I felt that this book, there were a lot of characters that kind of played the same role. That you could have gotten away from. And but aside from that, the story was great. It was scary. It was Lovecraftian in the sense that there was this kind of an unknown, these outer worldly beings were coming in and messing with this town. And then, like we said at the beginning, there's this whole religious fanaticism aspect to it, which that was the part that really got to me. And yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I don't know if enjoy is the best word for it, but I definitely liked this book. I'll tell you what, I had never heard of Ramsey Campbell until you put out that search for like, what's a great Lovecraftian story, modern Lovecraftian story. This made me want to read more Ramsey Campbell. I think it did its job there. So I definitely enjoyed this book.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about that, Danny, is that like Ramsey Campbell actually doesn't really like this book of his. He actually thinks this is not as good a quality book as his other books. And when I was doing a little research, people were saying that this is a more like commercial kind of version of one of his stories, where he's trying to be more commercial, more mainstream. And they were even saying that it was kind of like almost like a response to Salem's Lot. Like he was trying to make like a Salem's Lot story.
I can see that a little bit.
Yeah.
I read Salem's Lot during quarantine also. So I can see that connection in a way.
Yeah.
Jerusalem's lot to this small town,
Moonwell.
Moonwell. I could see that.
This story takes place in a small town called Moonwell, and the idea about Moonwell is that they have this cave that has this like literal like well, this hole in the ground, and the people of the town have these druid practices. And when it comes to the longest day of the year, they like to have a little ritual where they put flowers to the entrance on the cave, right? And so a guy comes from out of town, an American, and his name is Godwin Mann, and he's going to change things probably for the worse.
Yeah.
So, Danny, I was going to ask you, right? Because you listened to it on Audible, you just said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just like me. Did you get a kick out of the narrator trying to do an American accent?
I did. I actually got a better kick out of him trying to do I guess you would call the main protagonist in this book is Diana, who's an American teacher who's moved to Moonwell. And I really enjoyed the male British narrator trying to do an American female accent for her.
Yes.
As well as Mann.
Godwin Mann.
Godwin Mann, yes. So there's multiple American accents that he's trying to do.
Yeah.
I get a kick out of Audible. It's funny. I'm actually, for those of you who are fans of our channel, you can tell I'm not in my own home right now. The woman whose home this is in is actually British, and I love British accents are one of my favorite things. I love British accents. So just listening to the narrator do this on Audible was a kick for me.
Mm-hmm.
And hearing them do the American accent was like an added bonus.
Yes.
So yeah, that was definitely, I definitely enjoyed that.
He's got like this real thick accent. He kind of sounds like he'd be like in Snatch or like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking. But he's got like one of those like thick accents. And then when he does the American accent, when he's like Godwin Mann, he kind of sounds like Christopher Walken if like someone had punched him in the head. You know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yes, I can totally see that. Like he sounds like somebody who doesn't speak with an American accent, doing an American accent.
Right,
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So Godwin Mann is quite the character. He comes to the town and he has this backstory where like his father was I think a Hollywood actor, right? Into all kinds of crazy shit, a satanic cult. I think he was into like promiscuous sex. Then he got his son involved in it too at a very young age, and it really messed up Godwin's life to where Godwin sought out religion, and he became very religious. And he has a whole cult of people that followed him over from the United States. Now they infiltrate Moonwell, and they are very easily able to turn the people of Moonwell into fanatics.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people in Moonwell that we meet, and there's a few of the people that are already very fanatical, and I feel like they're just waiting for a cult leader, like the heads of the school, the Scraggs, I think their name were.
Yeah,
they're just waiting for a cult leader to push them in the right direction.
Yeah.
They don't like Diana because they don't feel she's like religious enough and teaching her kids the right way. There's a lot of that going on, and like this seems like your kind of prototypical English town until Godwin gets there, and then like it's like you snap your fingers and everyone, with very few exceptions, turns on a dime.
Yeah.
And those were the parts, like there are scary parts of this book. There's like Lovecraftian stuff going on with the cave and what's in the cave and the legend of the cave and, all sorts of old ones and things like that. But like the parts that really got to me were the cult, deeply religious aspects, where like people who were your friends yesterday are turning on you today.
Yep.
And like not only turning on you, but basically ready to wipe you out.
Yep.
Like almost like burn you at the stake. Like real crazy shit.
Yes.
And there's I don't want to get political, but like being in America for the last 4 years, I see that. Yeah. I see that mentality.
Yeah.
And I know that mentality exists. And it's even scarier. This book came out in what, 86, you said?
86.
Here we are 35 years later. And it feels more relevant today.
Yep.
Than it did back then. So
yeah,
those are the parts that really got to me,
Yeah, man. Yeah, like, it's funny. We listened to The Stand. We read The Stand during the pandemic. That was kind of scary. And then we're listening to this. Now, if we had listened to this during the Trump era, I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't have been able to listen to it. Because like this was freaking me out. The religious stuff was giving me chills. There's one point where it gets too intense. I mean, at one point, there's this great couple, this nice couple, Jeremy and Geraldine Booth. They own the bookstore, the town bookstore,
Yep.
And the cult people get mad at them because they are selling books that there's like a naked boy in a book, right? And so they take it as like child pornography. And Godwin Man comes in, he buys all the books that they consider like a risk or whatever, and they take it back to the gutter and just burn all these books. And like I'm so
glad you brought that scene up because I literally I was out for a run, and I remember where I was when that part of the book came on, and I had my headphones in, and I was so angry.
Yeah.
And I remember like I was coming over the avenue. I was going over a highway on like a walkway, and I was like, son of a bitch, like, oh, that mother. I'm so glad you brought that scene up. That scene drove me really crazy because like that's the type of shit that I can see happening today. Like you see this all the time. Like, we saw this with like Dixie Chicks records not too long ago. And, anytime there's, music or, people who bring up cancel culture stuff, it's like, oh, we'll buy it just to burn it. And it's like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it makes me feel like Ramsey Campbell was ahead of the curve when he wrote this. It really does.
I really do think that. Like, because that's just one scene. There's multiple scenes like that. Now, Danny, as we've said before, he's an educator in New York. I'm originally from New York, and I'm in education in Texas. And the thing is, when I grew up in New York, religion was very much separated from school, right? Now, I'm in Texas, and religion is separated from school most of the time, but then they kind of work it in there. Religious people like work it into the school, and it bothers me because it's always like you got to separate church and state, right? This book has the one teacher you mentioned before, Miss Scragg, and our main protagonist, Diana, and they just are like butting heads because Scragg is all about teaching religion in the classroom, in the public school. And that really bothered me as like an educator, because I see little small glimpses of that in my career here in Texas. I feel like the book is like 2 sections. And for me, the beginning really stands out for me. And it's like very distinct, each scene really stands out for me. There's the burning of the books. There's this like confrontations at school. Then there is this one main character, Eustace, who goes to do his stand-up comedy at this open mic, and there's just this awkwardness because this religious group has infiltrated the audience, right? So like all these scenes really stand out in the beginning of the book. Then the book transitions into this cosmic horror, like you're saying, right? And the thing is, the cosmic horror stuff is really exciting to me because of the way they describe like what's happening and the creatures and stuff. That's real exciting, but that stuff kind of blends together. Whereas like the religious stuff is like, okay, this scene.
I remember like on Audible, there's 68 chapters in the book, and like he goes down into the cave in the 30s, and I'm like, what are they gonna do? And in my head, I'm thinking, what are they gonna do with the rest of this book? Like he's already and I think they did a really good job of like where like he comes out and you're like, oh, maybe he's like got, and then all of a sudden the darkness kind of like takes over this town, and you realize that Godwin has actually been affected by what's down in the cave, and anybody who goes and sees Godwin becomes affected by or infected by what was in the cave. In with Diana, where she goes to this kind of like old scholar of the town. I forgot his name. I finished the book a week ago, so I forgot. But he's like the oldest guy in the town who he was at the club when Eustace performs, and he does this like old song about like, the town, and he tells her about like the druidic history of the town and of the cave, and what was supposed to be in there, and how the moon, and it's like, you know, there's all these things in there about in Latin, luna, you think of lunatic is like people who follow the moon, and there's all this like crazy stuff in there that leads back to like what Godwin Man is going to be when he comes out of the cave, and what's going to happen to the town. And it's just really fascinating how Ramsey Campbell gets to, because I feel like another author would have made the whole climactic scene of the book where Godwin Man goes into the cave. And instead, Ramsey Campbell kind of uses that as like a midway point to like launch this book into a totally different stratosphere. Where like you said, it goes from like religious horror to Lovecraftian cosmic horror.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, we've talked about Lovecraft and we've talked about Stephen King a lot, right? And in the Lovecraft stories I can remember, there's little glimpses of weirdness and stuff, and at the very end, it goes into overdrive, and then the main character, or the person telling the story to the main character, loses their mind, right? Because it's like too much for them to process. And then with Stephen King, like an example like Needful Things, you have little examples of Gaunt like affecting the town, and there's like little horrors that happen throughout the story, but then it really ramps up at the end, right? This, it's like you hit that midway point, and then it gets really dark, and like the main characters who are all outsiders of this town just start to see like really freaky things.
The midwife. So she goes. So she goes to him, to Godwin, because she wants to like challenge him, because she loses. A pregnant woman comes in, and refuses to let her help, because she's like, God will deliver my baby, and the woman, and without a midwife's help, the baby ends up dying. And of course, now this poor woman, this midwife, gets blamed for it, even though she wasn't even able to help. So she goes to the hotel where Godwin Man is staying, to basically call him out and be like, you're the reason this baby's dead. And he's able to like force pregnancy on her in this bizarre like scene where, and like she ends up having like dropping babies out of her, and they're like these spider beings, and then like she eventually just finds the elevator shaft, and I think she just like takes a header out of the elevator shaft in order to like kill herself to get out of this like. But yeah, like there's scenes like that the whole second half of the book where people are convinced they need to go to Godwin to either call him out or to seek his help, and they end up going crazy and then like mutating into these spider-ish Lovecraftian monsters. Andrew's this kid. His no matter what he does, he feels like his parents hate him and his teachers can't stand him, and his dad ends up going crazy and like becoming like this spider monster. But then like in the middle of his transformation, he like kind of like I guess gets his humanity back and is able to kill himself as like a there's a lot of crazy shit going on here in the second half of this book.
Yeah. And, it's funny, right? Because you said spider monster a couple of times, and there is definitely spider monster stuff throughout this whole book.
Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of funny because this book came out a year after It, which It kind of has that sort of spider monster at the very end too, right?
There's like, a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of Stephen King. I know we're obviously talking about Lovecraft, but there does feel like there's a lot of Stephen King. Feel like you mentioned Salem's Lot earlier. There's also some It feel to this. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like one of the critiques I saw about this book was, it's kind of like what you were saying before, Danny, which is just like that the characters don't really stand out. That, you could have reduced the amount of characters, the outcast characters, they just don't really stand out as much, right? And so for the second half of the book, like you said, they just kind of get taken out one by one and kind of in horrific ways.
Eustace, he's this like stand-up comedian, and he's a bad stand-up comedian.
Right.
And he does this running dialogue inside of his head with Mr. Gloom and Mr. Despondency.
Right.
And there's this scene, like you were saying later, where all of the non-believers end up finding each other. And they're all like together trying to get out of the darkness of Moonwell to escape the town, but they can't make it out. It reminded me also now, obviously, the John Carpenter film In the Mouth of Madness came out in 1994. This book came out in 1986. But the Sam Neill character in the Mouth of Madness is continually trying to get the hell out of the town that he's stuck in. Hobbs End, I believe it is. And he can't. He's like, every time he's like about to get out of the town, the car just pulls back into the same spot. And he's like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And it reminded me of this because it's like they would drive onto the moor and they would go follow the road and up until where the moon was lighting up everything. And they just could never get out of this town. And like, I kept thinking this would be such a hard movie, a hard book to make into a movie.
Yes.
Because the whole second act is supposed to be in like pitch darkness. And it was like, how would you even film this movie when if the whole second half is supposed to be dark?
Yeah.
But Eustace is like two inner monologues end up becoming like floating heads on the side of him, which is so weird.
Yeah.
I did like Eustace. Eustace was one of my favorite characters in the book.
The end, and you're saying how hard it'd be to film this, right? Stephen King's actually a big fan of Ramsey Campbell, and when Stephen King made this book, Dance Macabre, he, it's about like the horror industry and the state of horror, and that was in like 1981. And he had a whole section dedicated to Ramsey Campbell.
Oh,
and
wow.
Apparently what Ramsey Campbell is known for, besides this book, because this book is like his most commercial thing, is he's known for like really surreal imagery. And Stephen King kind of compared it to either coming out of or going into an LSD trip. So that's the way, like, honestly, like when I read a Stephen King story, for instance, and it's time for one of the characters to die, or it's time for one of the characters to meet their final fate, it's very like, okay, I know that this happened to this person. It's pretty grisly. With this, I'd be listening to it. I'd be like driving to work, or I'd be like working on some kind of task, and I'd be like, wait, what just happened? Like it's almost like it's just like a nightmare. The end of it, you know.
Yeah.
And speaking of dreams and nightmares, Diana, that's kind of ironic too, right? Because Diana is the goddess of the moon, right, in mythology.
Yeah.
Diana, she kind of has this scene that's kind of reminiscent of Slither, James Gunn's Slither.
Oh yeah.
You know when the thing goes to crawl in the girl's mouth and she bites it and she has like a vision.
Oh yeah.
In the tub,
okay.
right? Diana kind of has like a vision of like what the creature is, right? Like she kind of
when she's like staring into that painting and she loses herself, right?
Yeah.
She meets this historian named Needham who tells her this whole history of the moon and the druids and how the druids prayed to the moon and there was a monster that was put into the cave and there's just like this long history. It almost feels like there's like this kind of like an exposition scene in the middle, but it's kind of like a flashback.
Yeah.
And she's like caught by Mrs. Scragg, I think. And she's like stuck in her apartment and she's staring at a painting or she's looking out the window and she sees the moon and she kind of goes into this like trance state where she almost like becomes one with like the I guess the druidic view of the moon and the monster in the cave and everything.
Yeah.
And she understands what it is. We don't really understand what it is, but she does.
Yeah.
And she's able to like kind of like she's able to use her like abilities towards the end to like move it away when it's like trying to attack her, or when Godwin or the spider thing that is Godwin Man is trying to like get at her.
Yeah.
It's a very bizarre ending and a very strange kind of sequence of events that leads to the ending. And in that regard, it does kind of feel like a Stephen King book a little bit, where it kind of rushes. It kind of felt like it rushed to this bizarre ending.
Yes.
Much like a lot of Stephen King's books, but it also feels like it was in line with what was going on in this town the whole time.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad you brought that up because that was actually a criticism, was that the end of it is like a Stephen King ending, and the way that Diana kind of saves the day is like a Stephen King ending too. Because the way that I interpreted it, because you're saying it's weird and like you're not really sure what happened, the way that I interpret it, I might be totally ass wrong, but like I interpret it like the kid dies. Andrew falls to his death, right? And she's over his broken body in the street, and she starts to sing, and someone, either the narrator or someone there, literally says that like she's singing to make it into like a sacrifice, like she's offering up a sacrifice. And so I took it like she was singing to the god of the sun, or like light powers. And that's because what happens at the very end of the story is that the sky just like becomes like an explosion. Like it's like this brilliant, bright sun. And everybody that's in the town, everyone that's fallen under Goblin Man's spell, looks up and everyone in the town goes blind. It's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
You know?
I took it as very similar to that. Where it not even necessarily this explosion of light, just that it was so pitch black dark for so long, and the only light for like the entire second half of the book was moonlight. And then out of nowhere, with like nobody knows what time of day, almost like, I know you reviewed 30 Days a Night, and it kind of reminded me of that, where it's just darkness so long, you don't know what time it is, you don't know what time of day it is, it's just dark out. And then, oh, the moon is up now, so it must be nighttime now.
Right.
And then out of nowhere, the sun just bursts through the darkness.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, like people are blind. I love I actually do love the last the very last part of this book, where because one of the continuous themes is every time Nick, this reporter, every time he leaves, he would go to Moonwell and then he would leave. And every time he would leave, he would forget about Moonwell. And everyone who left Moonwell just forgot about it. It became this like forgotten place. And he goes back and everyone's blind and he sees Diana in the bar and like nobody seems to remember anything and he doesn't even seem to remember anything.
Right.
But everyone's blind except for Diana and him. And it's like this super cool little, like, almost like an epilogue scene that I really enjoyed. It's a very, I don't know if I would complain about the ending. I think the ending is good. It is one of those things where it does kind of like, it's like one chapter at the end that kind of just finishes off the whole story.
Right.
So I can see the comparison to King there, because King is known for, 300, 400, 500 pages, and then we have 20 pages left. Let's completely throw a curveball ending in here.
Right. Yeah. So, revival, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I actually really enjoyed it. I would read more Ramsey Campbell. I'm glad that we chose this particular book, but I am also kind of glad that we're winding down our Lovecraft month. Danny will have one more Lovecraft Country episode to do, right? 2 more episodes. And then that's it. And then for April, we're just going to be reviewing shit that comes out on Shudder. Because, Danny, April's a pretty big month for Shudder, right?
Yeah, they're doing their halfway to Halloween celebration. And it starts right on April 1st, which is just a few days away now, with the debut of CREEPSHOW Season 2, directed by Greg Nicotero. And so there's a ton of stuff coming up for that. We're going to be covering the episodes of CREEPSHOW. We're going to be doing tons of Shudder stuff throughout the month. And we're also going to be covering Them, which is coming out on Amazon Prime.
Right.
I think April 9th.
Correct.
And we did a quick review of the trailer, and we're going to be covering those episodes.
So if you guys have read this book, I'm real curious to see what you thought about it. If you could leave in the comments your opinions on Hungry Moon, let us know. If there's any other Ramsey Campbell books you guys want to recommend, tell us in the comments too. And any other kind of like modern Lovecraft-inspired story, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah.
So, man. So, Danny, thanks again for talking about a horror book with me. You're always expanding my horizons. And what do you call it? We will get together real soon, and we'll be talking about some stuff from Shudder.